So Finances
Okay.
and Fallacies is the title. And we're here today with me, Lindsey. So I run a financial firm, Stripper Financial Planning, and then also a coaching company, Scoops of Vanilla. And both of those companies work with sex workers primarily to offer financial advice and coaching and education overall. And then Rachel, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yep. So for those of you who didn't hear, I'm Rachael. I'm a licensed mental health counselor based out of Florida. I do EMDR, yoga, all bits and bobs. You may have seen me before. I love to come up with fancy names for webinars, and I love to do webinars. So I've been in conjunction with Pineapple for, I think, 3 years or so now. So we are excited to hopefully blend these two worlds that really, I mean, they're very different, but also share some overlap, and hopefully just talk about something that sometimes is considered taboo, even in, the adult industry, where obviously there's more talk about how to make money, how to access money, how to be financially empowered. Finances are still, as Lindsey knows very well, even the most open people are kind of uncomfortable with that sometimes.
Yeah. And Rachael and I met at Expos this year, actually, in Miami. So we got chatting, and we're surrounded by all of these people who are working so hard for their money, and very impressively. And I think that once you try to, we all in some way value relationships. And so once you try to put that working self together with a relationship self, money is often one of those things that we equate with trust. And so that's one of our tools with intimacy, to be like, how do I connect with this person? I'm going to share my money with them. I'm going to show them that I trust them by, sharing expenses with them, paying for them to do things. And that can be really complicated. And because it's, one of those taboo things, we don't necessarily talk to other people about it. So today we're really going to be talking about financial red flags, having some very specific examples of what that would look like. And then also, in addition to the red flags, how do we create healthy habits? How would we respond to that in a better way? And then we're going to leave a lot of time at the end for questions and answers related to these topics. And then also kind of to the topic at large of financial health in relationships and what that looks like. So I'm going to dive right in. So we're going to talk about healthy ways to share finances and kind of like the nitty gritty actual details of what does that look like. The go-to probably in my vocabulary, because I can't phrase everything the same, is going to be a partnership with two people, but this will ring true for whether it's romantic, a family. So you might be living with your sister, with your adult child. It could be polyamorous. So if you have multiple people, whether you're dating or married or related in some way. So I definitely encourage you, as we're talking about this, to think about how it can relate to multiple relationships, not necessarily just the romantic one you have, because they can kind of pop up with a lot of things, especially if you are making more money than your family ever has and you didn't grow up with money, and your family relies upon you for money. That can be really complicated. So this is something that can definitely come up. So exactly. I've seen over the 10 years that I've been working in finance, 3 healthy ways that people typically share finances. And we're going to talk about all of them, but basically partners having separate account, and they each have access to their own account. So they might share expenses, but everything is talked about. The other person doesn't have access to it. That's pretty much the typical. You see that in a lot of dating relationships. Even if you've been exclusive for a while, you still have separate accounts. Everything is discussed. The other option is having separate accounts, but having your partner on the account as well. And the benefit of this would be, okay, I want them to potentially access the account, but they couldn't. You're the primary and they're maybe the secondary. So they could take money out of the account, but they couldn't boot you off of the account. And that's really important, because if you broke up, you could be like, okay, never mind, this person is off. I'm taking them off of the account and they don't have access anymore. But during the relationship, they could have access. And I see a lot of people doing that as kind of a middle ground. And then the third, and this is one that is pretty common, kind of hetero monogamous relationship, is joint accounts with joint access. So everything is shared. everything is the same. So we're going to talk about all of those.
Yeah, and I think it's important to look at because it really draws into question trust. Like this is a huge thing, whether it's forced trust, coerced trust, I guess I should I? A lot of this comes into play of, again, like Lindsey said, what you've seen with your parents or guardians, maybe even what you've seen on TV, what you feel like you should be doing versus what you might want to do. So it could challenge a lot of like how you feel about things and how you might approach things. And a lot of times, we just want to make sure that you feel comfortable to make decisions that are based on what intuitively feels proper for you and what and that not trusting someone with full access to your money doesn't mean that you don't trust them per se.
Exactly.
Because it's how money is used is kind of a whole different conversation than how someone might, be trusted with your emotional needs or things like that.
And also I've seen and just watching other couples interact with me or other families interact with me that when you get to a really mature level of trust, it's accepting that other person's boundaries. So they might say, I've had bad relationships before. I really want to have this money boundary for me to feel safe and secure. And you trusting me means accepting that. So you might talk about the details of that, but a lot of times trust comes from really communicating all about that and being able to talk about something that's very vulnerable and something that's very intimate, not necessarily just saying, I'm going to share everything with you because I feel comfortable with you. So having separate accounts and solo access is something that I generally recommend to everyone initially, especially if you can be reflective and you look and you're like, I get into a lot of different relationships. I maybe have a little bit of a messy relationship with my family. I'm still working through some things with myself. I'm going to set the boundary of, we might share expenses. I might even give them money, but I'm not going to have them have access to my account. So every time that happens, it's a conversation, which is good. That's teaching yourself boundaries. That's teaching yourself communications. So that's really good for new relationships until you figure out the other person. It's also really good if a lot of times we bond with someone emotionally or on a variety of levels, but they just have different money habits. A lot of times you have one partner that's frugal and the other one is a spender. And if you share accounts and share everything, you aren't really able to maintain those separate habits. You just go to whatever person is more loose with their finances, and that can be a stressor. And so having the accounts separate, but just sharing mutual expenses can be really helpful to have that not be a fight. And it's a lot easier if you talk about these things before that. And the same thing if you have different income or expenses. A lot of times you have someone who earns a high income and maybe the other person is on disability, or maybe the other person only works part-time because they're a stay-at-home parent, and so if you have separate accounts and separate access, then you have the ability to say, I know I work less and I earn less, but this is the amount of money that's fine. And so I can spend it how I want to. Option is, sometimes you have a partner that doesn't earn an income. So that might be because they're independently wealthy. It might be because they're on sabbatical or they're going to school. And so that can help it be a healthy relationship where you talk about the shared expenses rather than someone in a lot of ways potentially taking advantage of you. And that's a red flag that we can see.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Because there's so many different ways to think outside the box here. That you can have accounts that are like, this is our mutual, we save for vacation, or this is like our house fund. So when it comes to repairs or fixing up, as opposed to we feel like we have to pool everything together, and then the accountability starts becoming lost. People become anxious. They feel like they have to track everything. And kind of, going back for a second when Lindsey talked about, well, hey, trusting me is trusting that I can have my own account. That's what I need to do. That doesn't mean anything against you. Also, on the flip side, we don't want to ask that of somebody. Hey, for me to trust you, I need us to share accounts completely, or to, this, a lot of times we do see that in relationships that can be toxic, dysfunctional, or harmful, is people using that type of language of, bear it all with me. We share our finances, we tell each other everything.
Yeah.
That doesn't equal intimacy. And I think through through media and through past trauma and through family situations, sometimes we've learned that we have to kind of bear all, be all, share all, and almost just kind of merge into one person. That's, you know, a healthy partnership, relationship, friendship, family relationship is maintaining being distinct people who have each other in each other's lives to have a mutual benefit of support or care, not to become one and so intertwined, because that's not being an individual anymore. So some people will use that language to challenge your commitment.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are really good points. Yeah. So for all of these, we're going to talk about some fair ways to share expenses. So I really want to center in on that looks different completely for every couple and or group. If you're polyamorous, it really looks different depending on what you want and what you need. So some people choose to have it completely equal in terms of the numbers. So if you had 2 people in a partnership, it would be 50-50. If there's 4 people, it would be 25, 25, 25, 25, etc. Some people do that. That's really helpful if you have similar income levels and you have similar, I'll say, like domestic task levels. So if you both are physically able, you're both contributing in similar ways, that can be really helpful because it's just easier. And then you might have separate expenses that are completely different. So a lot of times, a lot of sex workers are self-employed, they run their own businesses. A lot of those expenses go into the image of a beautiful sex worker, the image of a stripper or a dancer or an escort. And so a lot of those costs will be completely separate, from the shared expenses that you would have. And it's good to have it that way because you don't really want your partner voicing like, well, why did you get your nails done? Or like, why did you get your hair done? Because that has to do with your business. That's completely separate. But for things like you might share 50-50 your mortgage or your rent or your utilities or taking care of your pets, things like that. The other option that people do is based on income level. So you might have a situation where, you both work equally hard, but one of you is an escort and makes a lot of money, and the other one is a teacher and doesn't make as much money, but you're both putting forth effort. It's just one pays more. So you might say like, we've talked and we appreciate what both of us do, but the person who makes more is just going to contribute more, and we're still going to view that as fair. We're still going to view that as a healthy relationship dynamic. And then sometimes I really like to talk about based on role because sometimes this is complicated. I'm going to say non-compensated contributor, and that's a big phrase for saying someone is serving as a vital part of your relationship but not being compensated. So a lot of people see that as a stay-at-home mom, but actually when we're at XBiz, I met a lot of boyfriends or girlfriends or spouses who were essentially like the operations manager of the ordeal, but weren't getting paid necessarily. They were bringing food to the performer. They were giving emotional support. They were, doing the camera work and everything behind the scenes. So you can have someone like that that really is bringing a lot of money to the table, or in typical society, this would be something that people are like, that's not true. But in situations with a sugar baby or someone who is making a lot more, but then you have someone who is like really putting a lot of energy into caring for that person and giving a lot of themselves to that, whether that is in, sexual ways or whether that's in like caretaking ways, that is contributing to the household in value, but not being compensated. So in some situations, they would either pay less of the expenses, or you would want to compensate them separately for that so that they view their contributions as having value. And I think I talk about this later, but I want to make sure that I talk about it now in case I don't. There's also the situation that can be a red flag of you have someone who you're providing for compensation wise, but it's just kind of like not doing anything. And I see that with a lot of, I guess I'm not going to say I've seen some performers who have that. Maybe they have a boyfriend or a girlfriend who's kind of there for the ride. And maybe they add a little bit of emotional support, but they're really just kind of grabbing a hold of someone that's going to take care of them. And sometimes there is value in that. But a lot of times, you just want to be aware of how much that you're providing for them and making sure that you're not getting taken advantage. And so I love having separate accounts for that, because you can really clearly understand, I'm paying for all of these things. Maybe I'm even giving them an allowance because they do give me something valuable, but I'm making sure that they are not taking ownership over my funds, because they really aren't bringing a lot to the table. They're just kind of being mild companionship.
I love that we're touching on the value of people that aren't compensated or don't, make much money in certain ways, but do other things to contribute to the household. And I think the important thing is, are you feeling like that's equal? Like there could be somebody who really, they come to you when you go to, conventions or shows, or they do a lot of behind the scenes work and help you out because, they care about you as a friend, as a partner, as anything. Or like Lindsey said, there's somebody who maybe they're kind of stuck in what they see as the glitz and glam of the industry, and they don't really get what it's like for somebody to be in the industry. They're just there because they think they're going to live a lavish lifestyle, but they're not inputting anything. So it could be really good to check. I love to ask, I would say mostly couples that I see, but in some polyamorous groups that I've seen too. Like out of 100%, how much energy, that includes emotional, financial, anything, do you feel like you put forth in this relationship versus what would you say the other person does? And if there's a really marked mismatch, do you feel like that can come closer to the middle, or do you feel like it's going to stay this way? And then just another point I want to make is that sometimes you can tell maybe how people feel about being close to someone in the adult industry, or if they're there for the right reasons. If they're looking at certain things that you're spending money on as frivolous, I've heard that a lot. Like, you just bought a new set of heels, or you just bought a new fetish outfit, and what are you doing? And it's like, this is work expenses just because it looks like an outfit, or it's fun, or it's sparkly, or it's
just because I'm enjoying it doesn't mean it's not.
Right, just because it has multiple uses. Maybe I actually enjoy it in my personal life, or I could take it out and use it. Doesn't mean that we can just make passing judgments about people's finances. It is everyone's personal experience. Hence why we're talking about some of the 50-50 or solo account access here.
Yeah. And I would say, it's really helpful in this. This is nuanced. There isn't a specific black and white answer, but for the roles that are either non-compensated or they're kind of along for the ride, it's very good for both parties to be really reflective of what that looks like. Because when you see, this isn't a good term, but I don't know the actual term to use that would be helpful, but a trophy spouse, people are like, oh, they're just taking advantage. The only reason, just supply and demand wise, the only reason that they are able to do that and be provided for is because they're bringing something to the equation. Once they stop bringing something to the equation, then there's going to be a break in that relationship. It might not ever break off, but there's going to be some sort of stressor. And I see that a lot with people, coming in and talking to me as a financial planner. So you really have to look at, what is that person bringing to the table? What value is that? And the safety for both parties, because I've seen, especially in sex work, you can see that going both ways. Sometimes the performer is the breadwinner and has, someone on the side. And sometimes the performer is the person that's on the side and is performing a service. So you really want to look at, what value is there. And you also, if you're the person that is that sugar baby or is the trophy spouse, then you want to look at, how am I protecting myself if that person decides that what I'm contributing is no longer valuable? What does that look like? And you also want to look at, is the person is the person that I have along for the ride giving me something valuable for me providing for them, or are they really just kind of leeching off of my resources? And I think we see that a lot more with family members, honestly, than spouses, but that's just something to think about while you're going through this, and you really have to be reflective with it. So I want to talk about a red flag situation with that. So a lot of things that happen, I'm going to use it in a sex worker example, but this happens a lot in heterosexual relationships when you have a stay-at-home spouse. So a lot of times you'll have someone who is a non-contributor, who is at home, who is doing a lot of things but isn't compensated. And so if you have separate accounts and solo access, that person might be being provided for expense-wise but doesn't have any money. And so when you are a breadwinner and you earn the money, you always have some extra money. I mean, hypothetically, you have extra money that you save, that you have the opportunity to go get treats, you have the opportunity to buy things you want to, you can invest. If someone is a non-compensated contributor and they're giving stuff to the household but they're not getting any money, they don't have that extra money to save or to do with how they want. So a lot of times it's helpful if that person is really giving a lot of value. Like I see let me think. Daisy from Daisy Does Taxes. She has a partner that works with her that contributes a lot. And in fact, when we were at XBiz, she was like, it's weird that I don't have someone like bringing me food. I normally don't have to like go and find food because it magically appears and then I keep working. And I was like, that's valuable. Like I wish I had that. But for that partner situation, even though they're being provided for by this other entity, they still need to have separate funds that they can really be independent with financially if they really are bringing something into the table. So you might have a discussion and be like, in addition to your expenses being covered, we're also going to send you, $1,000 a month into your solo account that you can choose to invest or something, so that if there ever was a break, you would still have finances, as opposed to what you see a lot in heterosexual relationships is the guy being like, well, I earned all this money and she just stayed at home, so it's all mine. So you really want to be aware of kind of the dynamics and lean into those conversations of like, what value are each of you bringing? Are you compensated? Is this fair? And that's awkward to say in terms of like, I'm paying my partner to be at home. But really you're giving them financial independence in a small way so that they're empowered and also feel valued in what they're doing.
I am so glad that you said that. I think more conversations around what is valuable, not to go on like an anti-capitalist rant, but I think, many people in the industry are familiar with this type because obviously, what type of services that your clients are looking for. So we're used to like me providing emotional support to you or me providing aftercare to you. Like these are valuable things that are kind of outside of the capitalistic realm in ways. So again, like Lindsey said, it's awkward, but sometimes we need awkward. Sometimes the typical lingo we're using, isn't working. And I love to introduce to my couples and families, like, it might sound goofy if someone says something like, hey, let's have a talk about, what we each do that's valuable to the home. That might sound like a sentence you would have never said in your life, but that also kind of clues in the partner, the friend, the family member, oh, they're trying. They want to have this conversation and we need to talk about this. So, and then it'll start becoming your mutual language the more that you use it and work on it. And then it won't feel so bizarre after a while.
Yeah. And that also brings a light to, invisible labor. And that's a talk that we have a lot more with heterosexual couples. However, that's still something that can apply to other things. And I even see that coming up kind of unexpectedly in relationships where one member or both members are neurodivergent or one member is disabled. I know for myself, I have a back issue. And so usually I do more of the domestic labor, but there are times where I don't do anything for like a week or two. And if that was the case all of the time, that would really put the burden of a lot of those tasks on my partner. And that's not a bad thing, but it is good to acknowledge that that's happening, that like, I am not doing this entire portion of tasks. And so it's not that everything has to be even, but those conversations, especially around money, help to kind of keep you from having those fights and keep you from getting into those abusive situations where your partner's like, well, you don't do anything. And I'm like, hey, I take care of all of the kids, I take care of the entire house. Just because I don't earn an income doesn't mean I'm not offering value, especially when you dig into like, what would it cost to hire someone to clean my house? What would it cost to hire an operations manager? What would it cost to hire, in a lot of cases, like a therapist, someone to really like care for me and talk to me about me, or a sugar baby, things like that. So those are all like really big conversations that we can't get into the details of today. But it's really helpful to start thinking through, like, what does that look like for me? How can I approach this in a healthy way? Oops. I skipped through. So next we're going to talk about separate accounts and joint access. And this one is going to be a little faster because it's very similar to the last one. But this is really helpful as kind of a middle ground once you get to a long-term or a trusted relationship, or just if you both are emotionally intelligent and a lot of cases, older, you've had a lot of previous relationships that you've worked through, and you trust each other and you have good boundaries. Having separate accounts, but having joint access just in case you're out and about and you need to pull money out of someone else's ATM because they asked to. But the important thing for separate accounts and joint access is that you're always still having that conversation about, if you're taking money from the other person, you have that conversation first. You're not just doing it. And this can be really helpful if you have very similar to the other situation, if you have very different money habits, or you have different income levels. Because in a lot of cases, one person will maybe very stay at home and work, and they really don't spend that much money on anything. And then you might have another person that is an escort and has a lot of expenses, and it has a lot of things, and is traveling and eating out a lot. There's a lot of different expenses. It becomes hard to mix all of those in one account because you don't really understand the money that you have and the abilities that you have to spend it. And in a lot of cases too, if you have, a partner that isn't working as much, they don't necessarily know. There's an awkwardness of like spending the money because they're not sure how much money they're allowed to spend. And they're like, well, my partner can spend more because they make more, but I don't want to spend that much money. So having separate accounts but joint access is a really healthy way to have that intimacy of, you can have access to this in emergency. You can have access to this if, I got sick and you needed to help me. But we're still having those conversations every time about spending each other's money. So the red flag example for this, I kind of already talked about, but what you really want to look out for is if this starts to go over the line of your partner being like, hey, my account was really low, so I just transferred over $1,000, or I'm not going to be able to pay for my car loan this month, so I took out $1,500 from your account to cover that. There's nothing wrong with them doing that, but that should be a conversation they're having with you first to say like, hey buddy, I'm kind of struggling with money this month. Could I borrow some for you? Would you cover it for me? And you want to have those conversations because at a certain point you want to be like, hey, do we need to change how we're like, are our shared expenses too much? Do we need to change how we're living our life? Because whether you're dating someone or married to someone, their finances do impact you, because usually if you love them, at the end of the day, you're going to cover for them and help them if they're in debt, or if they're struggling, or if they can't afford their expenses. So you really want to understand what's happening. So having joint access is a good, this is actually what my partner and I do. And we've been married for 6 years. I would say that there's no reason not to have a joint account. We just have separate accounts because it helps us both feel financially independent and like separate people. The same reason we don't have a shared Facebook account. Like we want to have separate identities. We want to make sure that we both are empowered in our situation. And if we went our separate ways, we would be able to kind of still separate our money in a type of way.
Yes, and I think it's a great conversation to have, because with this access, this allows for some flexibility.
Yeah.
But kind of like with this red flag, you want to start looking for patterns. Is this like every month, hey, my account's running low, or what is this? Like, I just saw this transaction, huh? And like you're getting blindsided, confused a lot. You're starting to feel taken advantage of, stepped on, or just not consulted with anymore, that can let you know that, like Lindsay said, a reevaluation, because as much as we all don't like to admit it, we're human, humans change, humans do odd and weird things sometimes, and like no one is planning for a lack of success in a friendship, a relationship, a marriage, a family. No one's thinking, well, I'm just going to keep my solo account because I probably don't see you 5 years in my future. No one's doing that, but we have to make healthy decisions based on, like, sometimes things go left field and it's unexpected and it's heartbreaking, but that's why we reevaluate and we look for patterns and we keep ourselves safe. And the proper people will understand that, or at least try to understand that and work on it.
Yeah. We also, a lot of times you're in a relationship, whether you're younger or older, there's a lot of different reasons, I guess, to be in a relationship with someone who's different than you. But a lot of times, I mean, I've been in relationships with people who I wasn't really drinking at the time, and they would spend, $500 or $600 a month on alcohol. And there wasn't necessarily an issue with that, but it wasn't an issue because they were doing that in their account with their money, and I had my account and my money. And that is just, I wasn't choosing to spend my money on that. And that can be the same thing with, if you have a partner who's very passionate about a hobby of theirs, you want to support them in that. You might not necessarily care how they spend their money, but you would maybe care if they're spending, $1,500 a month on video games. If you don't play video games and you're like, I'm not getting anything out of this, so why is the collective doing this? So it can be helpful that way, and that just keeps that from being a fight, because you can just be like, I don't really care, it's your money, you spend it on whatever you want to. I'm gonna spend it on like my dog, and you spend it on your video games, and then we will both be happy. So that really keeps, I've seen a lot of success in people having that separate, especially when they have very different lifestyles, because it really keeps those fights from happening, and it keeps it from like brewing under the surface and then being like, why did you spend $40,000 on this boat? Like, why? So things like that. So that can be really helpful. All right, so the last ones we are going to talk about, okay, I'm a professional. The last one we're going to talk about is one that we see pretty commonly in monogamous heterosexual relationships. So this is probably what your parents did. I'm just going to guess. It's definitely what your grandparents did, because most women who are our grandparents' age weren't allowed to have their own bank accounts. So we're really not that far removed from women just not being able to have their own separate accounts. So that's why a lot of this isn't intuitive to us, because there hasn't been healthy patterns passed down either way. So for joint accounts and joint access, this I see is very, very helpful if you have dependents, because there are just a butt ton of shared expenses and confusing things, and there's a lot of things going on with different expenses. It can get kind of annoying if you're like, okay, I'm going to pay for my kids' food today, but then you're going to pay for T-ball, and is it fair? And so there's a lot of that. This can also be helpful if you're in a relationship where there really isn't a significant power dynamic and you haven't had that be a big part of your life. It's really hard to escape the power dynamics of money if that has been a struggle in your life, with your parents or with abusive partners, or if you have been the abusive partner. So if that is something that really hasn't impacted you that much, for one thing, congratulations, you're saving a lot of money in therapy. But secondly, I actually see this a lot in queer relationships. There isn't as much of a power dynamic. They both bring similar things to the table in a lot of cases. And it's easy to have joint accounts because you're just like, I trust this person, it works fine, especially if you have similar money habits, if you tend to do the same things, if you make similar income, if you have similar expenses, you do a lot of things together. And then also if you're married, legally, whether that's like helpful or unhelpful, legally, you have more protections in terms of if you had all your accounts together, it's going to be split somewhat evenly afterwards anyway. You won't have control over it even if you have separate accounts. So in a lot of cases, it doesn't really matter if you're married. But I would say generally my recommendation is not to have joint accounts with joint access. But a lot of people do it anyway. So I wanted to talk about it. So there are a lot of red flags, so I wasn't going to get into all of them. But the reason I don't recommend this as much is because when you have a joint account with joint access, usually there is one person that is like the money person and the other person is like, I don't know, I don't really handle the finances. I just listen to my partner because they're better at money. I really recommend, if you take anything away from today, is that you don't do that. You can have someone who does more of the admin tasks related to it, that sets up the auto pay, that, you know, make sure that the credit card is paid, make sure that the mortgage is paid, but you want to make sure that that person is sharing all of that information with you. So maybe that's in a Word document or a spreadsheet where you know where the money is going, the logins for everything. What I saw a lot with working with older couples is you'd have, you know, a husband that handled their finances for all of their life. He passes away at like 70 and the woman is like, I was never the money person. I don't know where anything is. I don't know how to access anything. This happens a lot with divorced couples. There's a money person, whether it's the, you know, a male or a female or whatever. In a lot of cases, there'll be one person that handles it, and then you get divorced, and the other person just doesn't know how to approach any of it. So, if you are scared of money and don't want to handle it, I would really be self-reflective of making yourself be uncomfortable. You don't have to do it every day, but just know what's happening. And this is a related red flag example, but you never want to have a joint account where only one person has access to it. You always want to have your own bank account. And I know that that is something that a lot of sex workers I've seen don't do that because they don't want their money to be associated with their legal name. And so they maybe have a partner who they transfer the money into it. So they handle the money. It's not related to them. I really don't recommend that. And there's a lot of ways to get around that to have safety for yourself, but still have access to your money. You just don't want your income going into someone else's account and not having access to it. That is the biggest red flag of all of the red flags.
100%. Yeah. I would say, just like Lindsey's saying, just be able to have access, you know, and it could be as simple, if you don't already, not that like a partner or family member is trying to limit it, but you might say something like, hey, you know, I know that you handle most of the money, but I'm just wanting to learn more, you know, just because I realize like I'm kind of out of the loop with things and I want to be, you know, more involved with this. And you can see if you're going to get a red flag or not based on, no, I do all of that. You know, don't worry about it, forget it, versus like maybe like a, okay, like, but yeah, let's work on that together. I'll make sure that you have all the logins. Here's what I have on auto pay. Here's what's going on. And that just being generally educated is really powerful. You know, we're not asking you to be a Lindsey or, you know, like be a CFO of an organization, but, you know, so basic financial literacy can go incredibly far. And like Lindsey said, that's kind of what I've seen in my individuals, because I work with a lot of trauma and domestic violence, is it's not anyone's fault. Of course, like no one should go in. People should be allowed. If they're like, hey, my relationship is I don't really handle the money, that should be safe, but sometimes it's not. And then you walk away and realize like, I don't have anything on my resume. I don't have much income. I don't know where to start. So financial literacy and some basic involvement can help you just in case, you know, something were to happen, because I see that a lot where people are like, I didn't know at all that we were going in the hole in the house. Like everything was said, oh, it's fine, it's good. The mail's being taken in by the person. I don't see the overdue notices. I don't see this, I don't see that. And I'm just kind of lulled into this. Next thing I know, something happens, I'm out of this relationship and I don't even know where to begin. Yeah, we're not trying to do scare tactics here, but like life is life. We've all kind of been there. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and the other thing too is a lot of times you can, because of, how you were raised, how your past relationships would be. You can sometimes ask for this in the past and then realize it's not healthy. So I know earlier in my life, I have said, I'm not good with money, so I would rather you just handle it. I don't even want to see it because it stresses me out. There are a lot of people who have those conversations with a partner, with a family member. Please handle this because I don't feel like I'm responsible enough. It's very healthy to change. So you could have told a partner that earlier and then been like, and then when you ask them, be like, hey, I feel like I'd like to have, more access to the money. I feel like I don't know what's going on and I'm out of control. They might throw that back in your face and say, well, you told me that you didn't want any access to it because you didn't think you were, trustworthy with it. And that is a chance for you to say, I did say that and I felt that at the time, but I don't think that that was healthy for me. I think that I need to change. And that's an opportunity for your partner to step up and be like, okay, let me help you with that. If they really support you and want you to have financial independence as well, then they'll support you in figuring out healthy habits in that, even if you don't already have them. And if they're really resistant to that and they, throw that back in your face and are kind of manipulative and like, well, you told me not to, so I'm not going to let you. That is a really big red flag. And that's when you want to make sure that you aren't just having those conversations in your head. You want to talk to your, if you don't have a professional in your life, you want to talk to your best friend and say like, hey, I'm trying to get access to my money and my boyfriend isn't letting me. Or, you talk to Rachael, you talk to, you talk to myself and say, I feel like I thought that I had access to this money and someone was taking care of it for me. And now I'm realizing that I don't have as much access as I thought. And this person has a lot of information for me. This doesn't seem like it's going in a healthy direction. What does this look like now? And there are resources out there if that's a situation to help you figure out next steps for that, to help you figure out, what would life look like having access to your own money? What would a healthy alternative to, this potential big fight look like? What are next steps? So I definitely wanted to put that out there because these are really hard conversations to have. It's complicated. And it's really easy in a relationship where you have love and trust and intimacy and fights and energy to not be able to trust your own gut and not know the right direction to go. So it's really helpful to have another, person there to listen to you. So I just put some takeaways away. We already talked about, refraining from having a money person, but just making sure that if you do have different money habits, you have separate accounts. If one person is a non-compensated contributor, you understand, what that looks like. Have those conversations. What value is being added? Is that person being a leech? All of those things. Well, this has been lovely. Thank you so much, Rachael. It is always great to see you.
You too.
Spend some time with you. I hope you all get, something good out of this and feel free to contact us at any time.
All right. Take care, y'all. It's good to see you again.
Bye.
Bye.